Greetings everyone and welcome to the Vintage Realms of Gaming. This is Dixon, logging on. In this episode, I'm going to give you the backstory of the original workplace of the founders of id Software, the makers of Doom and Wolfenstein. They were all employed by a software publishing company named Softdisk Publishing. The game programmers and the game designers, John Cormack, John Romero, Tom Hall, and Adrian Cormack, founded id Software together in 1991 after they left Softdisk. Before id Software's successful work with Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, and Quake, they were making games that uses EGA graphics. Some of them were 2D platformers like Dangerous Dave, Shadow Knights, Rescue Rover, and Commander Keen. And there's first-person shooter games that uses the earlier Wolfenstein 3D engine before the actual release of Wolfenstein 3D, like Hover Tank 3D and Catacomb 3D. And both of those games also use EGA graphics. You know, back in my days, I was limited to console games. And the first two first-person shooter games I remember from id during the 16-bit era was Wolfenstein 3D and Doom. And I didn't have hardly any access to first-person shooter games at the time. That's when I actually started getting into them. Well, mainly playing both the inferior ports of Wolfenstein 3D and Doom on the Super Nintendo, which I borrowed from a friend of mine at the time. Then the following generation from there, I started getting more into first-person shooter games on the PlayStation and Nintendo 64. And as time goes by, when other first-person shooter games start flooding up the video game industry, both Wolfenstein and Doom keep getting bigger and bigger, because they were true groundbreaking inspiration for other first-person shooter games today, and they always will continue to stay on top of the first-person shooter gaming world. But now, I want to go further back to where the game designers actually started. They had to start somewhere. Like I said, they started out doing games with EGA graphics, which leads me to ask myself a question. Like Doom and Wolfenstein 3D, does the earlier work from the creators of those two games stand out for today? Well, they were not known or remembered to the mainstream gaming like the other two, and most of them have been kept on the back burner since those two games made it big in the world of gaming. That was until the digital distribution for gaming came along years later, like on Steam or Good Old Games. And like me, I finally got a chance to play these type of games nowadays. And I'm now going to give you my impression on them, and see if I can get an answer to my question. Let's start off with the first series, Dangerous Dave. The first Dangerous Dave game was released in 1990 for Apple II and IBM home computers, and created by John Romero. The first Dangerous Dave game was just a weak platformer compared to the 8-bit side-scrollers on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Well, it might have been something back then, but looking at it and playing it now is pretty weak, stiff, and monotonous. I mean, it's not bad or anything, it's just that it just doesn't hold up. Their first Dangerous Dave game is entitled as Dangerous Dave in a Deserted Pirate's Hideout, which does sound like a reasonable title for an adventure game, but for today's standards, without trying to be insulting, it feels more like a deserted project. All you do is collect jewels and exit. Using the gun in the game once after you acquired it is pointless, just like the jetpack. You get the gun on level 3, the bullet time's very slow, and when you advance to the next level, you no longer have the gun. Now the jetpack runs on fuel. You have an option of flying through the exit or be suicidal to get extra jewels for points. And regardless of fuel, the jetpack also disappears on the next stage. And the sound effects. Like any other common sound effects during that time, they were pretty irritating. But then again, it was common for computer games back then. Dangerous Dave in the Deserted Pirate's Hideout was influenced by Super Mario Bros., but unlike Super Mario Bros., the first Dangerous Dave game is not worth getting into. But I do have to give John Romero credit. After all, the makers of Wolfenstein 3D and Doom have to start somewhere, don't they? However, the follow-ups had a big graphical improvement, and the story makes the character even more worthy of the title, Dangerous Dave. The second Dangerous Dave in the series was entitled Dangerous Dave in the Haunted Mansion, released in 1991. And what Dave does is come in the haunted house with a shotgun and a pair of balls blasting away zombies, ghosts, and slime balls, and any other monster that gets in his way. The first one is you're on a wimpy-ass treasure hunt, and you start out unarmed. But in the haunted mansion, you're armed to the teeth. You're on a hunt to rescue your brother, Delbert. The plot of the character in the haunted house makes much more sense. And every time when you get killed, an animation panel comes up and shows you in a gruesome way. Well, sometimes in a gruesome way, sometimes it can be boring. And how do you reload? All you have to do is just stand there and press nothing until he gets his shotgun reloaded. The Haunted Mansion is much better than the first game, but it still can get repetitive, difficult, and plus the annoying IBM sound effects is still there. The two Dangerous Dave follow-ups from the haunted house, Risky Rescue and Dave Goes Nuts, are pretty much the same type of gameplay, with a few improvements and different stories. That's pretty much all the details of the Dangerous Dave series I can tell, so let's now move on to the other series that the id Software founders were involved with before they made big with Wolfenstein 3D, the Catacomb series. The first Catacomb was created by the other id founder, John Cormack, in 1990. The first Catacomb game plays like the arcade game Gauntlet, except Catacomb is a single player, and the Catacomb game looks way too dated. And there's too much pink in the game. And if you go with the CGA graphic option, it looks like shit. Above all, it's still playable, but definitely not worth getting back into. But once again, the makers of Wolfenstein 3D and Doom had to start somewhere. The next Catacomb game, Catacomb 3D, was released in 1991, and the whole id Software team was behind developing this one. Catacomb 3D is much more worth going into. It's a first-person shooter game that uses an early Wolfenstein engine. You do pretty much the same thing from the original Catacomb, except you're doing it in the first-person style. And Catacomb 3D is a strong point for Wolfenstein 3D, and a bright future ahead for id Software. Catacomb 3D did have interesting elements, but every time when you touch a wall, it sounds like a bunch of fart noises. And the sound effects is still not great either. Well, at least a little better, since it's Ablid sound. So at least the sound is catching on. And the game has music in it, but the only issue is they can only come up with one song through the entire game. I mean, it's cool, but after a while I get sick of it. Catacomb 3D can get really repetitive after a while. The wall textures on each stage can be too identical, and all you do as a wizard is throw magical missiles at monsters and look for keys to unlock doors. And lots of times you have to shoot magical missiles at walls to see if there's a hidden area that has keys and projectiles. Overall, I do give id Software more credit for what they accomplished in their first FPS game. One of the most interesting things about Catacomb 3D is that you look at your portrait, and when you get hit by an enemy, part of your skin starting from the neck decomposes. And once it gets halfway up to your face, it's really scary, man. And that last hit point is the top of your hair. Then you're dead. id Software was also simultaneously working on Wolfenstein 3D. So I guess that explains that Catacomb 3D wasn't id Software's top priority. The next three Catacomb games were all part of a trilogy series. Catacomb Abyss, Catacomb Armageddon, and Catacomb Apocalypse. id Software had no involvement with the trilogy, since id left Softdisk in 1992. But Softdisk had the rights to the Catacomb games along with the Dangerous Dave games, and Softdisk had a new development staff named Gamer's Edge, who developed the Catacomb trilogy and the last 2 Dangerous Dave games. As much as I have to admit, the trilogy is a major step up over Catacomb 3D. The trilogy had more monsters, and a much more creative and well-detailed textures around each stage, and each chapter has a better storyline. And I would have to say Gamer's Edge did better with the follow-ups. But of course there is a reason, because id Software was focusing on something much bigger. Something bigger that will set the course of the first-person shooter genre and the future of the video game universe, and make history. Wolfenstien 3D. I would have to say the Dangerous Dave series and the Catacomb series are good, and they still are to this day. But these EGA graphic type of games doesn't hold up compared to the successors Wolfenstein 3D and Doom that uses the VGA graphics. So that kinda explains why either Dangerous Dave or Catacomb games were remembered, because Wolfenstein 3D was the main project, and then id stepped further ahead with Doom and Quake. But if you're interested in getting the complete packs of Dangerous Dave and Catacomb, they have both packs on GOG.com for a price of $5.99 each, and I say both packs are reasonable for that price. Well, that's pretty much it with the backstory of id Software and their partnership with Softdisk Publishing. Please do like, leave a comment below, and subscribe to my Vintage Realms of Gaming YouTube channel. And please do find me on my social app pages like Facebook or Twitter. Until next time, so long everyone. Dixon, logging off.